Hello, Scouted Football pod fans. Welcome back to the Scouted Football podcast with me, Joe Donoghue. Looking forward to delving into the various topics and themes from today's instalment, as it's a little left field, but there are plenty of avenues to explore within it. With me, we have a returning guest, first-time Finish's very own Ben Bocsák, who you may be familiar with from the episode on Mali and their attempts to reach a first World Cup finals next year. Ben's been busy, as always, lots of stuff to catch up on. But first, how's it going, mate?
Yeah, very good. How about you?
Yeah, not bad at all. Enjoying sort of the end of season drama.
Absolutely. Yeah, all over the place.
All consuming this just wall-to-wall football every day. But I say that every week on this pod. I'm pretty sure people are getting sick of me saying that. But in terms of what you have been up to recently, of course, the today's episode is on Dinamo Zagreb, obviously the most historic club in Croatia. But you recently had an interview with Romeo Josak on First Time Finish. What was all that about, and sort of how did you come about getting that name?
Yeah, so I was fascinated by Dinamo Zagreb after they knocked out Tottenham recently, and had a little research. And the more I delved into it, the more sort of the more interested I became and invested in the story. And I wanted to speak to someone in relation to the club, and kind of came across Romeo Josak, who was the academy director for a long time, both at Dinamo Zagreb and the Croatian national team, sort of the youth setup. And I thought he'd be the perfect sort of candidate to talk to. He's currently working in America, giving consultation to sort of American soccer clubs back there. And yeah, he's a very interesting character to speak to. He's a very knowledgeable guy.
Yeah, he seemed like a really interesting guy, because reading that article that you wrote on First Time Finish, that was something which obviously when you raised it to me, I was kind of like, oh, okay, there's a lot more to this. We can get a podcast episode out of this. We can really string this out, because there's so many, as I said in the intro there, there's so many avenues to explore. And as you were saying, just sort of delving into the history and the background of this club, you start to see actually how many players, how many names, how many reputable figures have come through. And it's like, all right, okay, we should probably discuss this, because this is kind of the Scouted Football brief here. But in terms of what else you've been up to, aside from the Dinamo Zagreb piece and the Josak interview, what else have you been writing on First Time Finish?
Through loads of stuff. I think I'll probably talk about stuff that we got coming up. We could have our Inside Story series is a very popular one, and we could have one on Jeremy Doku coming up, who is going to be at the Euros. We did an interview with Joe Carlos Teixeira. Probably Liverpool fans will remember him from the academy, and he actually played with Diogo Jota at Porto as well, and Andre Silva. So that was a fascinating conversation. And yeah, just all sorts of those type of content coming up.
Lovely stuff. Well, it sounds very good. We've gone years without using the right tools for the job. We've all been there, some manscaping ruined by a shaving accident. That's why Manscaped has just released the new Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer, which features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce those needless grooming accidents. It's even waterproof, so you can use it with ease in the shower. Complete with a USB charging stand, 90 minutes runtime, as well as 20% discount and free delivery when you use the code SCOUTED20. What are you waiting for? Make your testes your besties. On to Dinamo Zagreb, though, and sort of a little bit of background about the club. Most people will know that they're a Croatian football team, but they're the most successful club in Croatia, with 21 domestic titles, league titles that is, 15 Croatian Cups, 6 Super Cups. And they were also the winners of the 1967 Intercities Fairs Cup, which was sort of a precursor to the UEFA Cup and the Europa League. But it was actually this season that they got furthest in the Europa League, the furthest they've ever got, which was as quarterfinalists. They were knocked out by Villarreal, of course, who have now made it to the final, getting past Arsenal. But it's been a fascinating ride over these past few years. I remember watching a couple of games of them in the Champions League group stage. It may have been last season or the season before. But the Stadion Maksimir is just such an iconic stadium. It's very harsh and severe, very brutalist, but it's got a very passionate fan base, and it's as you were saying, Ben, the more that you sort of researched into this club, the more that you recognize that this is a story which needs telling. I don't know was there anything sort of the background of the club when you were doing your research for the Yozak interview that really stuck out to you about sort of about Dinamo Zagreb?
I mean, I just think like obviously coming from like a Western perspective, you don't realize how big these clubs are. Dinamo, Hajduk, and the two Serbian clubs, Partizan and Red Star Belgrade. They're hugely popular in Yugoslavia and the Balkan region. And in terms of like, I think what was nice to discover when I talked to Romeo is that he actually worked with Luka Modrić as well. That was kind of his first steps into management, and the fact that the first sort of high profile player that he worked with as a youth coach was Luka Modrić and Vedran Čorluka and those type of players was kind of a cool little insight. I managed to get a cool little insight about Modrić as well in the process.
Very nice. Obviously, you're talking about Luka Modrić and Vedran Čorluka there, who are, of course, I mean, Luka Modrić is a global name, but Vedran Čorluka, most people sort of in English football would recognise him as being a player who played for Spurs towards the end of the 2000s, beginning of the 2010s. But obviously, have played their part in the Croatian footballing sphere for the past 15 years or so. The one thing about Dinamo Zagreb that I think a lot of people may neglect to realize or notice is that one of the things that stuck out in your article was that you said, according to the CIES Football Observatory, Dinamo Zagreb have produced the third highest number of professional players, 71, currently playing in Europe's top divisions, which is sort of similar levels to your Real Madrid's, the Castilla there, Barcelona's La Masia, Ajax's De Toekomst, Benfica's Seixal academies. In terms of talent production, this is kind of one of the European hotbeds, which certainly does not get the credit that I think as you mentioned, perhaps the more Western ones do. And I think one thing I do want to say on that is that granted, this is partly down to Croatia has a population of around 4 million. And it's partly down to sort of the funneling of the best young players in Croatia going to Dinamo. But you need to have that infrastructure in place in order to develop the players who then go on to become World Cup finalists, of course. The story of Croatia, going toe to toe with France in that World Cup final, the 4-2 defeat in 2018 is a fascinating one. Of course, beating England in the semi-final, a country with massive resources. But that was the one thing that stuck out to me. I think from your learning of Dinamo Zagreb, Ben, what was it about the youth production, the youth talent side of things that was there anything in particular which was kind of really really stand out?
I think what I was really surprised by is that in the UEFA Youth League tournament, both in 2019 and 2020, they made it to the quarterfinals, which it kind of just passed me by really, but they finished above Man City in the group stages. They finished above Man City in the 19-20 UEFA Youth season, and they actually beat Bayern Munich as well before they lost to Benfica. And then in the 18-19 season, they beat Liverpool, and they only lost to Chelsea on penalties, who were Chelsea, I think, ended up winning the tournament that year. So I think that was kind of fascinating to see that, as well as developing these world-class players who've played at Champions League finals. So, for example, I think since the Manchester United Barcelona Champions League final in 2011, every single World Cup, every single Champions League final since then has featured a Croatian, and it's mostly been from Dinamo Zagreb's academy. So the likes of Mandzukić, Modrić, Lovren, Mateo Kovačić, or Ivica Olic. And then on top of that, well, Rakitic and Perisic, who didn't come through Dinamo Zagreb's academy, but still Croatian. So it was just fascinating how you don't really notice it, but Croatia is actually a big sort of power. And I mean, I guess the 2018 World Cup proves that they have real quality.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, people kind of think, oh, yeah, Croatia, they're obviously a very good team, but I think they might neglect to realize that it is, as I mentioned earlier, a country of, only a few million people. It's very similar to how Uruguay has a very, very small population in South America, but has been something of a footballing powerhouse in terms of the players they've produced. The likes of your Edinson Cavani's, your Diego Forlan, Luis Suarez, of course. These players, and not just the attackers. The likes of Walter Gargano, Enzo Perez, those types of more destructive defensive midfielders. There's a nice spread of talent there, and I think it's very similar with Croatia as well. But in terms of that World Cup final we were talking about, one of the other things that I picked out of your piece, kind of cherry picked, was that 14 players in Croatia's 2018 World Cup final squad had either come through Dinamo's youth system or represented the club at some point prior to the game versus France, which was a World Cup record. Which in this day and age, you think is if this was the 1930 or 1938 World Cup final, perhaps that might have been a bit more prominent because one club would have had so much dominance. But no, that is the record for the World Cup finals. Of having the most players from a single club, or to have had as much one club having had as much influence as Dinamo Zagreb. So that is, that again, we've spent the first 10 minutes or so here kind of just stressing how impactful Dinamo Zagreb has been on Croatian football and European football, of course. But in terms of in terms of sort of building a reputation, we had probably the most high profile player at that club in the past few years, especially from sort of a Western perspective, hasn't even been a Croatian. It was Dani Olmo, who's obviously a Spanish international now, but he left La Masia, Barcelona's famed academy, for Zagreb in 2014 when he was just 16 years old. How do you go about luring? I mean, you'll know this because you spoke to Romeo Jozak, but how do you go about luring a player who, by all accounts, was a very talented player in Barcelona's academy to Croatia? It's not exactly a well trodden path, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it kind of stems from probably, a decade before that, when Dinamo and Romeo Jozak in particular came to the club and decided to make a lot of radical changes. Firstly, and that was, after you've had the likes of Modrić, Kranjčar, Eduardo, Olic, and Chorluka, and Mandzukić come through. But even so, I think the reason why those players ended up at Dinamo is, like you said, is because Dinamo kind of hold hegemony in the region, and all the best players kind of come there. But then in 2007, the academy sort of developed a very unique and successful system, and one that doesn't just get the best players, but it makes sure those players go to the top clubs and perform at an elite level. And all that started in 2007.
So, in terms of going back to sort of around that time, and one thing that we've looked at sort of in the prep for this was sort of historic squads, and this was actually a really fun endeavor for somebody like me who likes to think that they probably know a little bit about football, but going and finding something out which was completely just unbeknown to me. And around that time, around 2007, this was essentially before those radical changes came in play. The 06-07 season, Dinamo Zagreb, they won the Croatian title, surprise, surprise. But they won it in style with 30 games won, 2 drawn, 1 lost. You had a 20-year-old veteran Chorluka, who we've discussed, 20-year-old Luka Modrić, who's a name who won't need much introduction to most people, but also 17-year-old Milan Badel, who has been at Fiorentina and Genoa in Serie A for the past decade or so. And also 23-year-old Eduardo Silva, who was probably best known as Eduardo in English football, famous for the horrific leg break that he suffered while playing for Arsenal. But prior to that move, he scored 34 goals that season in the Croatian First League. So that was a monumental effort. But, this going back even further, there was the 2002-2003 squad, which had, again, some very familiar names. But at the time when they would have been scouted football players, essentially. So, Eduardo back then was 19. He was still, that's when he sort of started to come through with Dinamo. But he also had 17-year-old Nico Kranjčar, who, of course, has been a household name over the past sort of 10 years with Spurs and Portsmouth in the Premier League. But also Ivica Olic, who was 22 at the time, was the league's top goal scorer that season. And I thought that was really intriguing that this club, the further you go back, constantly there's just a rich youth footballing heritage, which clearly, as we've discussed about the UEFA Youth League campaigns, has been carried on in recent times. But was there anything about sort of the historic squads for you, Ben, that was like, when you were doing your research or anything like that, where you thought, this is actually really cool? Because that was essentially what I was getting from going back through them on Transfermarkt, just looking down, scanning the names and going, oh, I recognize him. And I was like, oh, there's quite a squad here.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, even just like recent, not that historic, but like, the fact that Brozović was there, I thought that was cool, and Kovačić at the same time. That there's been in the 2010s loads of interesting squads, and I think what those really early squads, I think what they did was, like you said, created that sort of youth culture, as it wherein Dinamo would play those youngsters, and then around that, Romeo came in and he decided to create a sort of structure to it as well to make it more successful. And like I think for me, in terms of the changes, I feel like it's important to address the radical changes that we discussed. And when Romeo came in, he actually fired 20 to 25 coaches at the academy, which is a big overhaul. And he hired 32 new coaches in their place. And as much as how well run the club is and all the drills and the sort of program that they have set up, I think what the most important thing that I got from Romeo, when I asked him about the secrets to Dinamo's success, is he talked about mentality a lot. So when he was first sort of setting up this academy system, he would travel around Croatia, all over the place, scouting for coaches, and he'd often watch them from his car, and like making sure that they had the right mentality and the right sort of profile, for what he was looking for. And he even told me sometimes, they didn't have like the highest UEFA badges or the UEFA badges that you would normally require to work at a club like Dinamo Zagreb. But because he saw potential in them, he decided to give them a chance because they offered something different or something that was in line with his philosophy. And whilst they were working, they were actually getting their badges whilst they were working at the club. And I think mentality is something that Dinamo Zagreb are very keen on, even in terms of player identification. They like players, as Romeo would put it, who dive headfirst at the ball, and
Hmm.
will play with their blood, sweat, and tears. And I think uh, a lot of the successful players that we mentioned are kind of like that. Your Modric's, your Kovacic's, and your Cholukas. They're kind of players who have that mentality and will do anything to win.
Yeah, the win at all costs mentality, I think, is something which you hear in interviews with players, with managers, with people who've been successful in the game, and you do. It is a common theme, and I think a lot of the time you do get mentality floated around as a buzzword of sorts, but there must be something behind it to say that it is actually something which matters an awful lot, especially at this younger side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important sort of comparison. So when I spoke to Romeo, he said Luka Modrić didn't actually stand out that much in academy football, but whereas someone like Alan Halilovic, who he worked with a lot, stood out a lot. And he said Alan Halilovic at any age could do whatever he wanted on the pitch, and he was just incredible. And people back then were calling him, the Croatian Messi.
Yeah.
And he got, I think Barcelona were kind of looking to even replace him like replace Messi with him. And he's someone, on the flip side of the coin, who maybe probably didn't have the right mentality or the right psychological environment to make the next step up. Maybe, he probably made the wrong choice as well by moving to such a big club at such a young age. It was such a big step up from Dinamo Zagreb. So yeah, I think that's like a interesting comparison to make.
The inverted Dani Olmo move, essentially, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Speaking of moves, then, I mean, just going through sort of the recent sales that the Dinamo have had, and it's one of those baffling things. You look at the amounts of money, and you think, well, how much it must cost to run a club which isn't in sort of the top 5 European leagues. Of course, it's going to be, it's not going to cost. You're not going to be paying the sort of the £200,000 a week Gareth Bale wages on loan at Spurs, that sort of thing. So sort of just looking through, and I mean, these are selected transfers that have the outgoings from Dinamo Zagreb over the last 3 years. We've got Josko Gvardiol, who's 19 still, has been playing there this season, but agreed a €15 million transfer to RB Leipzig. Nicola Moro, who's 22, when he was 22, signed for Dinamo Moscow for 8 million. Dani Olmo, who we've just spoken about, left for 20 million euros to Leipzig. Filip Benkovic, when he was 21, left for Leicester City. Ante Koric for 6 million to Roma. Ivan Sunjic for 8 million to Birmingham City. That one flew under my radar. But Borna Sosa as well, when he was 20, he left for Stuttgart, who's done fantastically out this season, who we've discussed on a previous podcast. He left for 6 million euros. But with Sosa, Ben, he's been in the news this week because he's had a bit of a change of heart, and he's going to declare for Germany internationally. And I believe his mother's German. But for somebody who was coming through the Dinamo Zagreb youth ranks, for somebody who has been, for all intents and purposes, Croatian, what do you think Romeo's stance would be on that? Would he just be very content that somebody who his setup has helped develop is now going to potentially go and win major European honours, or would it be sort of a little bit leaving a little bit of a sour taste in the mouth?
It's interesting you asked that because we actually talked about Borna Sosa with Romeo during my conversation, and Romeo was very involved in this 2013 Dinamo Zagreb team, who it was the 98 and 99 generation who won the Nike Premier Cup at Old Trafford. And Sosa was one of the star players of that tournament. And he was just, Romeo was kind of raving to me about Sosa during our conversation. And that was about 2 weeks back. And he told me that, Sosa is the future of the Croatian national team. And
it's got a sting.
Yeah, so I feel like we kind of jinxed that because, yeah, since then, obviously, what's happened, and I feel like he'll probably be more disappointed because of how heavily he worked with the Croatian setup, and I feel like when you lose a talent like Borna Sosa, who I think is probably, especially in terms of his crossing, it's so unique and
Oh
it's
yeah.
so good. It's almost generational. Like there's a reason why they call him like the new David Beckham. And when you lose a talent like that, especially with the way sort of the strikers, the profile of strikers Croatia have in that team, like the likes of Mandzukić is getting a bit old, but Kramaric, you'd imagine Sosa would probably thrive in that Croatian team. But he's going to be a key asset to Germany as well now.
Yeah, absolutely, he will be, and I mean, we discussed this, but he's been great for Stuttgart this season. They've had a great campaign, and if you'd like to listen to more on Stuttgart, then there is a previous episode on the Scout Football podcast. But just looking at sort of Sosa's his rap sheet, essentially, he's played for Croatia from under 14 level up all the way up every single age group to under 21, which just makes it all, and spending the best part of 12 years at Dinamo Zagreb just makes it all the more difficult to take if you were somebody like Romeo. But yeah, he was one who left obviously the club, and I think they've got a knack of being able to sell at the right price. They know when to sell high, and just looking at some of the transfer fees from days gone by, Marco Rog who left for 13 million euros, Marco Piaca to Juventus for 22 million euros. Both left when they were 21. That's 35 million worth of. Imagine how much that could, I mean, we see why the youth football infrastructure at Dinamo is so successful, because this money is going straight back into that system. Or is everything not quite as it seems?
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of controversy surrounding that. Um, so I don't know. People probably saw that there was memes around social media when Dinamo knocked out Tottenham, and everyone was saying, Dinamo knocked out Tottenham with their manager in prison, and
Mhm.
we're talking about the Mamić brothers, who Zoran Mamić was the manager of Dinamo, who's now in prison, but his older brother probably had more influence on Dinamo Zagreb. Um, his name is Ratko, and he started out as a football agent and then became the sporting director of the club. And there's a lot of controversy around the two brothers in terms of their work with Dinamo Zagreb. They've been accused of, well, not accused of, they've been found guilty of embezzlement in 2015, and the embezzlement wasn't around these recent transfers that we're discussing now. It was actually to do with Dejan Lovren's move to Lyon and Luka Modric's move to Tottenham, and they were found guilty of siphoning 15 million euros from those transfers, taking it away from the club. Um, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure of how high those transfer fees were, but I'd imagine that was a good chunk of those two transfers, like especially because it happened like over a decade ago now. And on top of that, they were also charged with tax evasion as well. So not a good look. As I said, Zoran Mamić is now in prison. Zvratko is on the run. He's a Bosnian national, and he's fled to Bosnia, and he's hiding out there. And with Zvratko as well, I say he had the bigger influence of the two, because his sort of controversies and charges go back even before this embezzlement charge. He was actually sued by Eduardo Silva for an unfavorable contract, where Eduardo had to allegedly pay 50% of his wages to Mamic's family during his entire career, which is just crazy. And Eduardo Silva won that case as well.
Seems rather unfair, really, doesn't it? If you're being paid to play football and 50% of that doesn't actually go to you. But
Yeah,
yeah, it was something which I think a lot of people kind of knew about, but not the in depth, to the same degree of sort of the offences that were
yeah.
being laid out there.
A lot of people blame sort of Halilovic's downfall as well on the Mamic family. We wrote an article on First Time Finish about Halilovic, where we talked to a lot of Croatian journalists, and the Mamics are particularly unliked by journalists because they have a very hostile stance towards them. And the impression we got is they had a huge sort of influence on Halilovic when he was younger. They were the ones who kind of first started calling him the Croatian Messi and stuff. And uh, a lot of people in Croatia blame Halilovic's downfall on the Mamics, because they say that the Mamics gave him too much too soon. So yeah, they've had a big of influence on Dinamo Zagreb over this last decade, which I think Dinamo Zagreb's academy has thrived in spite of them rather than because of them. And it looks like that saga might be coming to an end now with Zoran Mamić in prison, and he's going to serve, I believe, his 6.5 year sentence. And Razratko is in Bosnia, so I can't imagine he has too much of an influence on Dinamo Zagreb anymore.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to stress. Is this academy and the footballing side of things has still managed to thrive despite that, and we were discussing obviously the millions, the multi-millions that the club has generated, and while there's obviously been some discrepancies there, then the club has still been able to actually invest some of this into developing the next generation of Croatian footballers. We actually on Scouted Football, we did also have an article, an interview with Zoran Mamić on on our website about Josko Gvardiol, who is obviously was breaking through at Dinamo Zagreb at the time. That was obviously before the accusations came to light, and obviously everything that has happened in the interim. But in terms of from a purely footballing perspective, I think the insight that Sasha Pisani, who wrote that fantastic piece, he gleaned from that was really interesting to see on Vardiol as a player. Get 20% off and free delivery with the code SCOUTED20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free delivery at manscaped.com. Use code SCOUTED20. Your balls will thank you. In terms of the current squad, we've obviously just spoken about Zoran Mamić, who was until very recently the Dinamo Zagreb manager. The current squad, I mentioned Vardiol, who has who has already agreed to join RB Leipzig and will do so. He's a left-footed. Well, he's actually not. He's listed as a centre back, but this season he's played as a left back, which is quite interesting because he's not exactly a Borna Sosa type left back in terms of his body profile. But he's played there for the majority of this season. But he can also play as a left-footed centre back. But he's not the only one there. Of course, there's Luka Ivanišek, there's Lovro Majer, who's 23, so he's getting to the end of that scouted football age range. But unsurprisingly, based on that half an hour we've just discussed, it's unsurprising that Dinamo have some really, really high potential young players.
Absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, their academy still getting to the quarterfinals of the UEFA Youth League up until 2020, and obviously this year the UEFA Youth League didn't happen, so we'll never know where they would have finished this year. But consistently getting into the quarterfinals is really impressive. And Guardiola, you mentioned, he played in both of those campaigns as a centre back then, and he's a very talented player, and I think he made the perfect sort of move by going to Leipzig because he suits their style of play. He's a sort of very modern day centre back when he does play centre back because he's very technically gifted, and I'd imagine that a lot of that comes from going through that Dinamo Zagreb academy, where the emphasis a lot of the times is on developing the technique. On top of that, he's quite fast as well, and I think that's why he's probably been able to play as a fullback as well. And he'll have a very bright future. I think the only sort of area of his game that he might need to polish a little bit is his decision making, but that's sort of to be expected from a young defender as well. At the same time, normally as defenders grow, they grow mature, and that decision making improves. So I wouldn't, overly sort of focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, he's 19 years old, and he hasn't really played. I mean, probably the highest level that he has played at against sort of other players his same age has been that UEFA Youth League, those UEFA Youth League campaigns. And obviously the Croatian First League is obviously a very good standard, but it's not quite the Bundesliga as you'll come to find. But, for 15 million euros, Leeds United were also very much interested in him because of his ball playing capabilities, because of his potential versatility, and, having that forward thinking sort of head up style. He is clearly a highly sought after player, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Jesse Marsch can do with him next season when he takes over, because he's been so beneficial to so many young players at Red Bull Salzburg. But apart from that, who else have you seen from Dinamo Zagreb? Other potential UEFA Youth League graduates or other players, perhaps some who haven't even come through the youth ranks.
Well, as you mentioned, I love Romeo. I really like him. He's a very technically gifted player as well, with a brilliant passing range. I think he kind of leads the charts in terms of key passes in the Croatian league, and his through ball, like the way he can just sort of thread a through ball, is excellent. But what I like about him is he also contributes in his defensive duties. He reads the game really well, and he makes a lot of interceptions every game, and kind of crucial to breaking up play for Dinamo. I think I watched him recently in the Eternal Derby against Hajduk Split, where he scored a goal. Obviously, he's good at getting goals and assists, but I think for him, he's 23 and he's still kind of inconsistent at times. So he can pop up with a goal, but sometimes he doesn't influence the games as much as your Guardiola, you know, a huge talent. So I wouldn't say Maya is going to have the same career as a Modric, who is being compared to a lot. But I do think he's going to be good enough to play for like a mid-table, lower league, lower tier sort of top five team. And Ivanušić as well. He was someone who really impressed me in the England under 21 game, like the under 21 Euros. He just is a very energetic midfielder, and he's one of those players you would hate to play against because he doesn't
Mm.
stop running. He reminds you of like a James Milner type, and I think he's the same with Meyer. I think he'll end up in one of those like top five leagues as well, but just not at like the highest level. And someone there's two lone players as well that I've kind of had a look at in the Croatian league and who I'd recommend keeping an eye on. And Dario Spikic, who is 22, he was born in 1999, and he was also involved in the Croatian under 21 team that narrowly lost to England, but also knocked out England at the Euros recently. He was bought by Dinamo back in January. He was playing for NK Gorica, and he was sent back on loan to Gorica. Currently has 6 goals and 6 assists as a winger. Uh, uh, he's someone who actually came through the Dinamo Zagreb academy before he went to their arch rivals, Hajduk Split, and then he ended up at Gorica and sort of making a name for himself in the Croatian league, and he's earned himself a move back to Dinamo Zagreb, and I think he's someone who's worth keeping an eye on. He kind of reminds you of like uh, Orsic, um, who's their current left winger or right winger sometimes. He's someone I think who could uh, replace Orsic if Orsic is on the move in the summer, which he could be because that hat trick against Tottenham, I feel like alerted a lot of clubs around Europe. And then another defender I was kind of recently analysed is Josip Sotalo, who kind of captained Dinamo Zagreb at reserve level. He actually played alongside Guardiola in the UEFA Youth League campaigns. I remember watching him against Liverpool, and he's a very solid defender. But he's also very fast and comfortable on the ball. And I think what really impressed me is he ranks in the top five for like defensive duels won in the Croatian league with like 72%, which is quite high for a defender. And he's currently on loan at NK Istra, but I feel like he's also one of those players that Dinamo will start putting into their first team because he's really impressed on loan this season.
He wouldn't be related to Bosco Sutalo, who's obviously at Atalanta, would he? I mean, I don't see that Sutalo, the one at Atalanta, he hasn't had any sort of Dinamo influence in his career. He was at RNK Split and then Osijek before going to Atalanta. Would you happen to know?
I did look it up, and no, they're not related. That's just a surname. I think probably maybe a common surname in Croatia. I don't
Yeah,
know,
it
but
might
they're
be.
not
Yeah,
related. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's really interesting, though. I think the route that a couple of those players have taken. There was Lovro Majer was one that I think a lot of people knew of because he was sort of you had the Luka Modrić and then the Halilovic and then a little bit of Lovro Majer, as sort of like Football Manager wonder kids, and everybody would sign them on their saves and whatnot. And in real life, sometimes they kind of just dip off the radar a little bit, but he was at Lokomotiva, wasn't Lovro Majer, and he did really well there, and that's what he kind of earned a move back to Dinamo Zagreb. So yeah, it's interesting how that probably is happens quite a lot. But there's one last player that I would like to talk about and that's Robbie Burton, who it sounds as though he doesn't exactly have a very Croatian name, and that's because he's taken a similar route to the Dani Olmos of the world by switching Arsenal for Dinamo Zagreb. I was wondering if you knew any more on that, sort of the reasoning behind he may have made that switch.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I'd assume he probably looked at Dani Olmo and kind of looked into, I'd assume he'd probably looked into the Dinamo Zagreb academy and saw the track record and decided that, that was the right move for him after Arsenal. I mean, you see a lot of English players these days go into Germany and that sort of Western Europe regions and or Central Europe. And I guess he decided to go a bit further east and try out his luck with Dinamo Zagreb. And I don't know, I watched his video story after Dinamo Zagreb knocked out Tottenham, and he seems to be having a good time there and enjoying, his involvement with Dinamo Zagreb. I think he hasn't really featured that much this season, but that's just because, he's a CDM, and Dinamo Zagreb currently have a lot of CDMs in that role, like Ivan Franjic even, who's also part of the Croatia under-21 setup, and a couple of other sort of older players who are currently, some of them I think will be playing at the Euros, not for Croatia, but North Macedonia and those sort of countries. So it's kind of hard to break into that midfield for Dinamo Zagreb at the moment, but he's still young, and I feel like we'll see whether that move. I don't know. I don't think it will have the same kind of Dani Olmo vibes, but it'll be nice to see a British player play for Dinamo Zagreb, because I can't imagine there's been many.
No, absolutely not. Well, that's just about it then on the Scouted Football podcast today. We've discussed Dinamo Zagreb, their youth academy, the background, a really historic club who've got a real pedigree in producing young players. The likes of Eduardo, Kranjčar, Olić, Luka Modrić, Lovren, Kramaric, Vasalko. All these players who are household names in Croatia, and obviously a lot of them have come through the Dinamo Zagreb youth system. Thank you very much to Ben for joining me on this. And I couldn't have done it without your insight and all the little bits and pieces that you gleaned from former academy director Romeo Jozak in your interview on First Time Finish. I'd implore anybody to go and read that piece if you would like a little bit more on Dinamo Zagreb and that sort of thing, more of an interview side of things. But yeah, all that's left to say is thanks very much, Ben.
Yeah, great to be on. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Where can people find you on Twitter with First Time Finish, all that sort of thing?
I guess just at First Time Finish is the easiest way to find my work, because my main personal Twitter account, I sort of just retweet all our tweets anyway, so I'd say go follow First Time Finish.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, I'd recommend that to anybody who's really interested in sort of original football storytelling, because the team that Ben works with over there is really fantastic at just finding really niche topics and fleshing them out into really interesting and thought-provoking articles. But yeah, that's been all from the Scouted Football podcast this week. Stay tuned for another episode next week. But it's been a pleasure having you. Stay safe. Take care. Bye for now. Get 20% off and free delivery with the code SCOUTED20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free delivery at manscaped.com. Use code SCOUTED20. Your balls will thank you.